Today on Pro Church Daily, we're talking about the ultimate shortcut to earning attention in a distracted culture.
Well, hey there. Welcome to Pro Church Daily, the show where in 10 minutes or less you'll get your daily dose of tips and some tactics to help your church share the message of Jesus while we try and navigate the biggest communication shift that we've seen in the last 500 years. I'm your host, Alex Mills, joined as always by the boss man, it's Brady Shearer, and today we're talking about the ultimate shortcut to earning attention in a distracted culture.
Alex, you and I were recently attending Thrive Conference in Sacramento, and I was part of this panel talking about digital communication, and a member of Pro Church Nation came up afterwards and asked me this question. And it was a difficult question. To summarize, essentially, he was asking, how can my church bridge the intergenerational gap that we have in our ministry? We've got this young campus full of young people, and we meet in this, I think it was a bar. We've got this, our original campus. It's mostly older people that meets in a traditional sanctuary. I feel like there's this disconnect between the two. How do we bridge that? And it was a difficult question to answer after a panel, and I said to him straight, I was like, look, there's only so much value I can offer you when it comes to answering this question without a much more intimate understanding of what's happening in your church. You know, I said it might take me a month of being with your church to actually get some action steps, but I did want to offer value in this answer. And so what I said was, the best thing that you can begin doing centers around storytelling. And the reason for that is storytelling is the most powerful form of human communication. We titled this episode The Ultimate Shortcut to Gaining Attention. That might sound hyperbolic, but we know, thanks to neuroscience, that storytelling is the only type of communication that actually forces our brains to focus. It forces us to pay attention. I remember sitting in Sunday service at my old church. We went back to see my pastor get sent off as he was transitioning after 15 years to another church. And my wife and I and her brother, my brother-in-law, went up. And we're sitting in the back row in service, and my brother-in-law is looking at Facebook on his phone while the pastor is preaching. And suddenly, the pastor transitions in the middle of his message from, exposition of Scripture to a story. He says something like, I once knew this girl named Stacy, and I was trying to pay attention for this, and I noticed that my brother-in-law immediately looked up from his phone and began paying attention to the message because a story had begun, and in his mind, that story had triggered attention subconsciously, prioritizing another human telling a story over Facebook, the distraction of all distractions, on his mobile device. That is the power of storytelling. In fact, if you were listening to this message, to this episode of Pro Church Daily, as I began telling that story, you likely perked up a bit more and began paying attention to it. That's how powerful storytelling is. And I believe that it's the most powerful skill that you can learn to actually help your church. Because whether it's cave walls or Snapchat, storytelling always wins. And what's amazing about storytelling is it never changes. So we're living through the biggest communication shift in 500 years. The second you figure out Snapchat, it becomes irrelevant, and you got to start over. And every time we learn something in tech, a new algorithm is introduced by Facebook, or the rules change on YouTube, and you got to start over again. If you can learn the skill of storytelling, it doesn't matter how many changes happen within the medium itself, because you are always going to be an expert at sharing the message. And so what I said to this individual is, I don't know how you fix the intergenerational gap or the multi-generational gap that you have. That's a huge issue that there's no simple fix for. But one way that you can begin stitching that, mend that problem is by just sharing the stories of the younger people and sharing the stories of the older people. Because when I'm a younger person and I see a name to a face, and I hear about Mary and how she came to the Lord and how she just became a grandmother and how one of the biggest struggles she had in her life was when she separated in her early 20s, and she thought she had met the love of her life, but they separated and she had to find a new life. Suddenly, I don't think of Mary as that old person that hates Facebook. I think of Mary as a real person who's walking with Jesus. And inversely, when you tell the story of Malachi and how he just finished university and he got his degree, but he's in more student debt than he thought, and he's trying to find a job, and he finally found a home in this church where he feels like he belongs for the first time in his 20s. And it was hard making friends once he left high school, but he's found in this ministry real community. Suddenly Mary goes, it's not those millennials that don't give and don't attend and are all entitled. That's Malachi, and he found some real community in our church. Those were fictional stories that I just made up, and I'm already feeling more excited about this church. That's the power of storytelling. And what's great is that every single person in your church has a story to share and to tell. Those were pretty run-of-the-mill stories.
Right.
A young person with student debt who can't make friends in their 20s.
Right. Welcome to the club.
And an older person who just became a grandmother who got separated.
Right.
These are pretty commonplace stories. This isn't like, I lost my arm in a gunfight and, I became a Paralympian. Like, this isn't out of the world stories. Everyone has a story.
Yeah, and this isn't just our opinion on storytelling. This is neuroscience, right? This is just how it is. And it's a tool. Storytelling is a tool as old as time because we see it in our history. We see it all throughout the scriptures. The Old Testament is just this gigantic library of storytelling about our history. And then enter Jesus, God himself, who has the greatest message of all time. And how does he choose to communicate it? Not through graphs, not through, lectures, but he just chooses to go around telling stories all the time because he knows that wherever people are at, whatever story he's telling, he can connect. They can self-identify with part of that story. Yeah, I see myself in that. But then also, like on the neuroscience level, you're kind of forcing that attention connection. When you start speaking in that way, you're kind of forcing, because the title of this episode, we live in a distracted culture. There's so much noise. There's so many advertisements. We're scrolling so fast. To cut through and to hear, the message of Jesus sometimes can be really hard, and to hear each other's stories, it just gets lost in the fray. But when we hone in and try and craft this tool of storytelling, it can be an invaluable tool to all kinds of growth in our church. And right now we're talking about bridging that multi-generational gap, and I think this is a really innovative way to do it. I think this is a really great insight from you. But I mean, storytelling, it's invaluable to what we're doing as the church, the capital C church, because we do have the greatest story of all time with, the biggest implications of any story ever told. And so if we can learn this craft of storytelling, we'll find, I think, that in the midst of this distracted culture, we'll begin to gain a lot more attention. And that's the story of Jesus being shared with more people.
I gave this individual who asked the original question this kind of next step when it came to storytelling, because I do believe that storytelling is the most valuable skill you can learn to help your church. I often use it as the solution to almost any communication problem. How do I make better videos? Focus on story. My social media posts aren't getting as much engagement. What should I do? Focus on story. What should I do with my website? Focus on story.
Even announcements at church.
Better announcements. That's the formula we use. Focus on story. And so the question, of course, is what is your church's story? What is your narrative? Well, let's talk about pro-church tools. For the longest time, our story was, we're going to help you learn how to make videos. It's not a story. It's kind of boring.
Yeah.
It took us 4 years, and so this might take your church a while too, but eventually we came up with this mantra, with this narrative: seize the 167. Every week is 168 hours. Service is one. What are you doing with those other 167?
Yeah.
We're living through the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years. Every industry is being disrupted. Our churches are not immune. We want you to be a pioneer in this new world, to share the message of Jesus in ways that have never been done before, because if we don't, the consequences are going to be very real. That's a lot better than, we're teaching you how to do Facebook.
Yeah, and that's not a story that we created. That's a story that we mined out, just doing the work and living life and coming into work every day and doing the stuff. That's a story that we mined out and realized, oh yeah, this is why we're doing this. We didn't create the story first and then adapt what we were doing to match the story, And so, like you said, your church, your community has a story. You're doing this. You're doing whatever you're doing for a reason, and you will. If you will open your eyes to it, naturally you'll begin to mine it out and see it unfold before you.
Like I said, it took us about 4 years to get that true story and narrative, one that was really sticky and people could get excited about. So maybe your church isn't there yet. This stuff is difficult, but one action step you can take right away is just start telling the stories in your church. The same advice that I gave to this person in Pro Church Nation that asked me the question after that panel at the conference. And if you're wondering, well, how do I tell stories? We actually have a free mini course on YouTube. No email required. It's right there as a playlist. It's called The Skill of Storytelling. And if you go to youtube.com/ProChurchTools, you can see that playlist and you can go through that full mini course. We teach exact formulas for storytelling and how to enact that in your church.
Awesome.
And that'll do it for today's episode of Pro Church Daily. We'll see you next time. Hey, thanks for watching today's episode of Pro Church Daily. We do appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button and it'll mean the world to us.
Hit the like button. It'll mean the double world to us.